This is the moment when Ukraine's Neptune missiles with a range of 1,000 kilometers struck the Taganrog military air base and aircraft repair facilities on the night of November 29th. A pair of Ukrainian Neptune missiles, weapons once dismissed as outdated relics, sliced through the night sky and struck the heart of Russia's Taganrog military complex. In a single flash, the air base that had sheltered Putin's strategic bombers, his A-50 spy fleet, and his experimental A-60 platform erupted into a blaze that lit the horizon like a dying star. The shockwave had barely faded when, hundreds of kilometers to the south, the Afipsky refinery, Russia's vital lifeline for military-grade fuel, burst into towering flames. Black smoke twisted upward like a warning to the Kremlin. Nothing on the Russian home front was safe anymore. But these were not isolated incidents. They were the first tremors of a catastrophic chain reaction that would unravel the very foundations of Putin's war machine. Within the same hour, as emergency sirens wailed across southern Russia, Kalibr and Iskander missiles, the so-called doomsday weapons meant to intimidate the outside world, malfunctioned in mid-air and exploded above the heads of Russian civilians. Panic spread across the region as fragments rained down onto apartment blocks, exposing a truth the Kremlin could no longer hide. Russia's strategic arsenal was beginning to collapse from within. And this collapse was not due to sabotage, nor luck, nor coincidence. It was the result of a brutal mathematical equation, a destructive logic that tied together every explosion, every fire, every failed launch. The destruction of Taganrog crippled Russia's ability to modernize its airborne nuclear deterrence. The burning of Afipsky severed the Kremlin's fuel artery, grounding aircraft, silencing engines, and choking the Black Sea Fleet inside its own ports. The failures of Kalibr and Iskander missiles revealed a deeper sickness, a technological decline accelerated by resource starvation, mismanagement, and the cannibalization of Russia's own industry to feed an unwinnable war. In the span of a single week, Russia's posture of invincibility cracked open, exposing its vulnerabilities to the world and to its own people. Putin's nuclear doctrine, once projected as an unshakable shield, suddenly appeared fragile, hollow, and dangerously unreliable. Factories meant to produce strategic weapons were burning. Facilities meant to repair bombers were reduced to rubble. Missiles meant to terrify NATO were detonating over Russian soil like grotesque fireworks. This was not merely a military setback. It was the beginning of a systemic unraveling, a chain reaction ignited deep inside Russia's industrial, political, and psychological core. The war that Putin believed he could contain at Ukraine's borders had now come home. And the flames rising above Taganrog, Novorossiysk, and Afipsky illuminated a new reality. Russia was cracking under the weight of its own war, and the collapse had only just begun.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a really critical look at a series of events inside the Russian Federation. We're talking about a sequence of military and industrial disasters that, well, they've simultaneously shaken the very core of the regime.
And these aren't isolated incidents, not at all.
No. Our focus is on a night of intense strategic attacks, specifically around November 29th. This wasn't just a random strike. It was a campaign that really reveals what we're calling the strategic bankruptcy of the Putin government.
It's a direct, deadly link.
Mm-hmm.
You have targets that might seem hundreds of kilometers apart, but they're connected by what you called a terrible math.
A terrible math.
And it's triggered this incredible destructive chain reaction. It's shaking Russia's nuclear doctrine, its military fundamentals, and crucially, its civilian stability.
So let's start with that opening salvo. That night, Ukrainian Neptune missiles hit the Taganrog military airbase, its repair facilities.
And at the same time, hundreds of kilometers south, the huge Afipsky oil refinery was just engulfed in flames.
This was the peak of what turned out to be a complete disaster week for Russia's whole logistical and strategic backbone.
To really get the connection between those two sites, we have to talk about military paralysis. There's a simple but devastating logic at play here.
The no fuel, no flight equation.
Exactly. The no fuel, no flight equation.
Okay, let's unpack that. Taganrog. This wasn't just some ordinary airfield, was it?
Oh, not at all. It was the last, and I mean the last, stronghold for modernizing a crucial part of Putin's nuclear triad.
The airborne component. We're talking about the big strategic bombers, the Tupolev 95MS, and those incredibly valuable A-50 radar planes.
The A-50 is Russia's eyes and ears in the sky. It's their early warning, their command center. Without it, the bombers are flying completely blind.
And Taganrog was the only place producing that experimental A-60 platform, right? A specialized command asset.
That's right. So when Ukraine struck Taganrog, they didn't just crater a runway. They destroyed Russia's ability to maintain and modernize its strategic airborne command, a capability that, took years and billions of rubles to build.
But even if those planes could be patched up somewhere else, they still need fuel. And that brings us to the Afipsky refinery. That's the other side of this equation.
It's the logistical heart of Russia's entire southern flank. It produces the specialized high-octane jet fuel needed for those strategic aircraft.
And for cruise missiles, too.
And for the cruise missiles. Sources say it's been struck 8 times now. The damage to the processing equipment is, it's devastating. Production of that critical fuel has stopped.
So if Afipsky is burning, there's no specialized fuel. And without that fuel, the planes at Taganrog are grounded. It doesn't matter if they're repaired or not.
And we're already seeing the real-world impact of this. A catastrophic logistical breakdown, especially with their missile launches.
Tell us about that, the reports from the port of Novorossiysk.
Precisely. We've seen these reports. Russian ships are trying to launch their high-profile caliber cruise missiles, but the weapons are, they're exploding in midair.
And falling on Russian civilians.
Falling on their own people. This isn't a targeting mistake. It's a critical mechanical failure. And it's rooted in a lack of quality, specialized fuel to properly power the missile's engine.
So the machinery just malfunctions.
It turns a high-tech weapon into an immediate threat to your own population. It's a disaster.
What's really crucial here is that the war is no longer just on the land border. The Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, has attacked Novorossiysk port.
Russia's largest gateway to the Black Sea, now locked down.
And the strikes went even further, into international waters.
Yes. The focus shifted to the economic lifeline. They hit what's being called the shadow fleet, the tankers, Cheros, and Virat off the coast of Kandera, Turkey.
These were carrying the oil that finances the entire war.
When you connect all the dots, it's a stunning picture. Air power is paralyzed by that Taganrog-Afipsky axis. And the maritime trade that funds the whole thing has been targeted and sunk. They've cut the logistical arteries in 2 absolutely critical domains.
Which sets the stage for a much, much deeper collapse. This isn't just about logistics anymore. It's about the failure of the future, the technological decline, and the great nuclear bluff.
And there's no clearer symbol of this than the failure of the RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile.
The doomsday weapon.
For a decade, that's been Putin's ultimate marketing tool. The unstoppable weapon. And recently, it reportedly exploded right on the launch pad.
So you've got the destruction of these high-tech repair facilities at Taganrog, and at the same time, this super weapon blows up. Can we really just call that bad luck?
You absolutely cannot. It is a symptom of the exact same systemic disease. It's a chronic lack of resources, it's technological stagnation, and just institutional neglect.
So the expertise to repair a complex spy plane
is the same expertise you need to build and maintain the world's most complex nuclear missile. If one is failing, you can be sure the other is going to follow.
The source materials also mention the collapsing launch pads at the Baikonur Space Center. That detail it's just so potent.
It is. It's a stunning metaphor for the whole Russian military-industrial complex. Baikonur was the peak of Soviet achievement. It launched humanity into space.
And now it's a symbol of decay.
The strategic implication is unavoidable. A regime that can't produce fuel at Afipsky or maintain its launch pads at Baikonur certainly cannot guarantee the reliability of its nuclear shield.
So the nuclear blackmail is melting away.
And what's left behind is dangerous scrap metal that's now exploding on its own soil.
So if the military-industrial complex is collapsing, what does this terrible math actually mean for ordinary people, for Putin's loyal base? This brings us to what we're calling industrial cannibalism.
This is where it really hits home. Industrial cannibalism is, it's when the war machine starts to eat the civilian economy. It pulls in workers with high salaries, stripping civilian companies of skill, and crucially, it sucks up all the fuel.
So when a strike hits a core supplier like Afipsky,
the civilian population is the first to feel it, the first to pay the price.
And we have specific examples of this, don't we? In Russian-controlled Crimea back in September 2025.
Yes, gasoline rationing. A strict 20-liter per person limit was put in place.
Which must have caused immediate chaos.
Complete social panic. You see drivers forming groups on Telegram and WhatsApp, just sharing sightings of fuel tankers. Then hundreds of cars rush to one spot only to find the pumps are already empty.
It's leading to crime, too. People stealing gasoline at night.
Desperate measures.
Right.
And this isn't just in Crimea, it's spreading. In Russia's southern federal district, over 220 stations have just suspended sales. That's more than 14% of the total.
And this is a region that has historically been Putin's bedrock of support.
Exactly. And this creates a disconnect that propaganda just can't fix. Putin's narrative is we are fighting the West. But the reality for an average Russian is their local factories destroyed, missile fragments are falling nearby, and they can't get gasoline to their car.
That's the foundation for real anger, for a sense of betrayal. The personal impact of that is far more powerful than any sanction.
And you have to consider the economic suffocation, too. There's this hidden unemployment. Putin admitted 200,000 workers were at risk in August 2025. 2 months later, that number was over 254,000.
And these are his people, the skilled workers from places like Taganrog or the Uralva-Gonzaga defense plants. His most loyal constituents.
Their jobs, their stability, it's all being betrayed by a war that is now failing on their own doorstep.
Which leads us to the coming winter, the winter of 2026.
Fuel shortages are absolutely vital for heating in much of Russia. And if a father in a loyal region can't heat his home or get milk for his child because the system has collapsed, his loyalty shatters. Just like that Sarmat missile.
So the fundamental contract prosperity for silence is broken.
It's completely broken.
This kind of internal failure must be creating enormous pressure at the top.
On the command structure, let's talk about that, and the elite panic. On the military side, losing a place like Taganrog has immediate tactical consequences. Without proper repairs and upgrades, Russia's frontline jets, the Sukhoi 34s and 35s, they just become blind targets against modern systems like the F-16s.
So commanders are forced to cannibalize their own fleet.
Just to keep a few planes in the air. It's a rapid erosion of their combat capacity.
And this kind of failure, it must push the relationship between Putin and his generals to the breaking point.
It creates paralysis. The generals will blame air defense, they'll blame the Federal Security Service, the FSB. The FSB will turn around and accuse the generals of incompetence or even sabotage.
And everyone knows that Putin is a results-oriented leader. Failure means purges.
Exactly. So a general who's afraid of being purged avoids all risk, all initiative. They're just focused on protecting their job. And that is a recipe for disaster on the battlefield. The fear filters all the way down.
And this war reaching deep into Russia, it must be unsettling the elites, the oligarchs.
Their entire world is built on an illusion of impenetrable security. And that illusion is shattering. The clearest sign of this elite panic is the confession of Alexei Chad, a former parliamentary advisor.
What did he say?
He talked openly about the return of barter agreements. I mean, just think about that. Confidence in the ruble has evaporated. When elites are trading goods for goods, it means stability has collapsed back to the chaos of the 1990s. Putin's 25-year promise of wealth and stability it's expired.
Okay, let's shift to the other side of this, to Ukraine's asymmetric triumph. Because these strikes, they aren't just about Western aid finally arriving. This is about the evolution of the Ukrainian army itself.
It is. Ukraine is achieving these crippling attacks deep in Russia's rear end, places Putin thought were totally secure, using its own domestically produced systems.
What are we talking about here? What are these systems?
We're seeing systems like the Neptune and the Bars missiles, and also long-range drones, unmanned aerial vehicles like the Piccolo and the Flamingo. This proves Ukraine's ability to develop its own cutting-edge defense tech.
So this is the definition of asymmetric warfare, really.
It's a perfect contrast. Russia is fighting a massive, clumsy, resource-heavy war of attrition on the front. At the same time, Ukraine is running a surgical operation in the rear to eliminate Russia's ability to even sustain that fight.
Small, agile technology defeating a massive, cumbersome system.
Precisely.
And here's where it gets so relevant globally.
Yeah.
Ukraine is doing this with almost no immediate U.S. support because of all the internal political debates over there. That sends a very powerful message.
It gives them huge leverage, especially with European leaders. Because Ukraine has shown it can do this with its own ingenuity. European Union countries are now going to deepen their plans to transfer frozen Russian assets directly to Ukraine.
So Russia is essentially being forced to finance its own destruction.
Exactly. And it pushes the West towards a formal strategic partnership, integrating Ukraine into the Western military-industrial base to guarantee they can keep this suffocation strategy going. Putin bet on Western support failing. Instead, Ukraine is winning by collapsing Russia's centers of gravity.
So if we bring all this together, the military failure, the social explosion, the elite defection, what does this moment mean for Putin himself? He's rejected ceasefires, and now he's paying the price for his own arrogance.
He's completely cornered. He has an unavoidable choice. either total helplessness and accept defeat, or frenzied aggressive retaliation. This is the moment of panic right before a potential collapse of authority.
And what should we, the listeners, be bracing for? What does that retaliation look like?
The most dangerous and I think most expected move is a maximum escalation against Ukraine's critical civilian infrastructure, especially in the dead of winter. Thermal power plants, water supplies. The goal is maximum chaos and terror.
And on the international stage, with the humiliation of the Sarmat failure.
That failure has badly damaged his credibility, so it makes it highly likely he will aggressively escalate his rhetoric, his threats to use tactical nuclear weapons. It's a way to force the West to take him seriously again. He's trying to crank up the diplomatic temperature as high as it will go.
Which brings us back to that terrible math. As you watch this unfold, you really have to ask yourself, what is more strategically dangerous right now? A leader who is simply failing and losing, or a leader who has completely lost control in the eyes of his own people and is now forced to choose this kind of catastrophic, frenzied retaliation just to prove he's still in command?
That is the question. The catastrophe facing Moscow isn't just military anymore. It's social and political, and it's all thanks to Ukraine's ingenuity and this successful strategy of targeting Russia's strategic depth.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the deep dive. When Vladimir Putin launched the invasion of Ukraine, the conventional strategic calculus was, well, pretty simple.
It was either a quick, decisive military victory
Or a long, grinding war that he could sustain because he had the support of the Russian people. His whole strategy was built on that assumption. Complete control, total internal stability.
And as our sources are showing today, that assumption was deeply, and I mean perhaps fatally, flawed.
Absolutely, because this is where the power dynamics get incredibly compelling. What he never really factored in was a dedicated, organized resistance erupting. I mean, not just in occupied territories, you might expect that.
Right.
But from what intelligence reports are now calling some of his own people, this is what's developing into a secret, almost unmanageable war of resistance and sabotage.
And it's spreading across Russia itself. This is far beyond, localized dissent. It's becoming a systemic structural problem for the Kremlin.
So for this deep dive, our mission is to synthesize reports, including some excellent ones from Euromaidan Press, to really uncover the scale, the coordination, and the strategic impact of these forces. We're going to look at the shadow conflict, from occupied Melitopol all the way to Moscow.
And a good place to start is right where that resistance has been most intense.
We begin in occupied Ukraine. Let's focus on Melitopol. It's been under Russian control pretty much since the start of the full-scale invasion, and it has quickly become an absolute hotbed for partisan activity.
The tactics they're using there are really designed for two things: to instill fear and to cause real physical damage. Car bombings are a go-to strategy.
And the reports detail just how persistent they are. There was an attempted attack in November, for example, aimed at a vehicle carrying a Russian drone crew.
That specific one failed. The car didn't detonate, but it shows the relentless pressure.
But it's not a strategy without success. If you look back to October 2023, saboteurs in Melitopol did successfully detonate a car bomb, and it killed several Russian occupiers.
And the Kremlin's reaction to that is so telling. Instead of admitting there's a security problem, they try to just brush it off.
What did they claim it was?
A short circuit.
Yeah.
But their actions, they betray that denial. In June, Russia sentenced an entire Ukrainian family, we're talking 20 years, to life in prison for collaborating with these groups and for railway sabotage.
That sentencing, the severity of it, really shows you the level of risk these people are taking. But it also shows how much trouble Russia is having containing this.
Exactly. And if we move over to occupied Luhansk, we see the pattern of success repeated. Just days after that failed attempt in Melitopol, saboteurs in Luhansk planted explosives under 2 separate Russian vehicles.
And they detonated them.
Simultaneously, killed 4 Russian soldiers.
What's fascinating is the methodology. That sounds strikingly similar to an earlier bombing in the Kherson region that killed 4 pro-Russian Chechen officers.
It is. It suggests these fighters aren't just isolated actors. They're becoming extremely well-versed in identifying key targets, getting access, and placing these devices effectively.
And it's not all about explosions. Intelligence gathering is just as vital, maybe more so.
Absolutely. Take the operations near the Saki Air Base in Crimea.
Yeah.
You had Ukrainian infiltrators on the ground recording fighter jets as they were taking off.
So they're essentially giving Ukrainian intelligence, that's the headquarters of intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or HER, they're giving them a real-time look at Russian flight patterns.
It's transformative. It gives Ukrainian planners this incredible data. What types of jets are there? When do they usually fly? What are their routes?
And that information then feeds into future operations, like missile strikes on the airfield itself.
Precisely. It makes that airfield a much more dangerous place for Russia to operate from.
So if we step back for a moment, what does all this add up to? The bombings, the intel gathering? Is it just localized chaos?
No, it's much bigger. It forces Russia to completely redo its strategic calculus. The coordination of these strikes is designed to paralyze their logistics.
But is disruption the end goal here, or is it something deeper?
The goal is permanent paralysis through persistent disruption. I mean, think about it. A vehicle gets destroyed. Now Russia has to decide, do they divert troops from the front to fix the supply line?
Or do they keep the troops fighting and risk the supply line failing?
Right. Ukraine wins either way because Russia loses initiative or time or critical equipment.
This level of sophistication, though, it brings up that key question: coordination. How do these underground groups know what information HUR wants? How do they get it across enemy lines?
And that is the clearest evidence of a strong institutional link between the partisans and Ukrainian intelligence. These are not amateurs. They're an integrated part of Ukraine's strategy.
But Putin's biggest strategic failure, really, is that this shadow war isn't contained to Ukraine. The sources confirm the resistance includes what amounts to betrayal by Russians inside Russia itself.
And that's a fundamental crisis of trust for the Kremlin. Let's look at the operations deep inside Russia, in Kursk. In the same month as those other operations, a Russian partisan group called Black Spark pulled off a massive sabotage mission.
The reports say they blew up a transport loading vehicle, one used for Iskander ballistic missiles.
Yes, targeting a critical piece of their strategic missile stockpile. But the real genius is in the coordination. Euromaidan Press reports that at almost the exact same time, in the same region, they also took out a Harmonia radar system.
A radar system that supports local air defenses.
Exactly.
That is brilliant. You disable the vehicle that moves the missiles, and you weaken the air defenses protecting the whole area.
Precisely. You potentially open an aerial corridor for Ukrainian drones or forces. At the very least, you force Russia to scramble its resources to cover that gap. The methodical nature of that should be, well, terrifying to Russian military planners.
And the targets are expanding. It's not just military vehicles anymore. There were attacks in October and November on infrastructure. Arson attacks destroyed 4 military logistics facilities in Bashkortostan and Vologda.
And that included communication towers and, crucially, a railway relay cabinet.
A relay cabinet sounds small, but for their logistics.
It's huge. Russia's military runs on its railways. You take out one of those cabinets, you're not just stopping one train, you're disrupting the signals for hundreds of kilometers of track. It's strategic economic warfare.
So despite this huge scale of sabotage, from Moscow to Irkutsk, the Kremlin is just sticking to denial.
It's their only play. Local officials are calling these complex, coordinated attacks unexplained technical failures. Russia is actively lying, expecting its people to just bury their heads in the sand.
But it's becoming impossible to hide, especially when the attacks hit the capital itself.
Right. Even in Moscow, their security is being breached.
That November 1st drone strike on the Ring pipeline, which carries millions of tons of jet fuel and diesel. The reports from Euromaidan Press suggest that strike was enabled by infiltrators on the ground in Moscow.
It's the same dynamic as in Crimea, but in the capital. Partisans likely provided that critical intelligence photos, schedules, precise locations that allowed HER to execute that long-range strike.
So Putin doesn't know who inside his own capital might be helping the enemy. That uncertainty must be paralyzing for an authoritarian regime.
And the existential threat for the Kremlin isn't just that these groups exist. It's that they are growing and they're becoming more sophisticated.
Tracing that evolution is it's startling. Novaya Gazeta reported in early 2024 that Putin was so focused on silencing his visible critics,
The protesters, the people speaking out.
that he completely ignored the underground resistance that was quietly forming.
So it started small. Green ribbons, secure online forums. It was more of a philosophical opposition at first.
Yes, initially intellectual, but the sources show it evolved and fast. Those forums grew into established networks. They moved from just sharing information to actually manufacturing things.
They're using technologies like 3D printing now to create what they need for operations.
And why is 3D printing such a game changer for a partisan movement?
It's decentralized. You don't need a big factory. You can produce custom parts, casings for explosives, special tools, quietly in a small workshop. It's almost impossible for security services to track.
So that's what turns them from an online movement into a real kinetic threat.
It is. By February 2025, the Atlantic Council was describing this movement as a full-blown shadow army that's openly collaborating with Ukrainian intelligence.
And we can name some of these groups. ACLE, the Conflict Monitoring Group, has been tracking them. Atesh is a major force in the occupied territories. They've conducted half of the 30 or so sabotage operations there in 2025 alone.
And then inside Russia proper, you have groups like Freedom of Russia, the Russian Volunteer Corps. They focus on hitting internal Russian targets, railways, telecom equipment.
And they have this incredible, almost ironic advantage.
They do. Many of them use their Russian citizenship, including the citizenship forced on people in places like Crimea, to cross borders without being detected. They're using Putin's own policies against him.
That really is the ultimate fear for any authoritarian leader. The spread of this sabotage from Moscow to the Urals, it's not just about logistics, it mirrors a growing anti-government mood. These are Russians taking immense personal risks to attack their own state.
Which brings us to the strategic takeaway. The true purpose of this shadow war. It's not going to stop the conventional conflict overnight. That isn't the goal.
The goal is to inflict persistent, widespread damage at inopportune moments. It's about slowly bleeding Russia's military resources.
Along the front lines, they're disrupting logistics, gathering intelligence, and forcing Russia to divert huge amounts of manpower away from actual combat.
And in the deep rear, the attacks on railways, on communications, on energy, they expose structural weaknesses that Moscow cannot secure without further stretching its forces. Every explosion demands they reevaluate security in 20 other places.
So the combination of Ukraine's long-range strikes and this internal sabotage, it threatens the very existence of the Russian war effort as we know it. Putin failed to see this internal crisis coming because he was only looking at the visible opposition.
Now, the facts show he is fundamentally outgunned in the shadow war.
And this deep dive really reveals that the war is much more structurally complex than what the daily headlines might tell you. This is a slow, methodical collapse being initiated from within.
This kind of internal opposition is terrifying to any authoritarian regime because it demonstrates a fundamental loss of control, not just over territory, but over the internal narrative and the security apparatus meant to protect the state itself.
So we'll leave you with this thought to reflect on. Considering the immense resources Putin poured into crushing the visible opposition and knowing the operational cost of fighting this growing, invisible threat, what is the ultimate price of ignoring a small, initial wellspring of motivated grassroots dissent? That's something to consider as this conflict moves forward.